We'll see if it's live. If we're not, we might start this again, guys. Tell me if it's live, and if so, you'll have to give me a little bit of prep
Nope.
time.
We have a live.
We
We have
have
a
a
live.
live. Is it? Can you see me and can you see
We
the
have
screen?
we can see you in the screen.
Right, I'm going to start this all again because I will be determined to get this right. So, guys, bear with me one
Monologue
second
2.0.
because I've had to close various things and sort things out. Give me a second. This is not the way the stream's supposed to start in 2021, but we'll go with it again. 2 seconds, guys. Be right back. Right, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully I'm now live. Hopefully I have Mr. Caesar's Legion and Mr. Rob Saunders with me today. Do I have them? Are you here? They're here. And hopefully everything's working. So I'm sorry, apologies for the bumpy stuff. That's what happens when you drink too much over Christmas and New Year's and then you try to do a stream on the 2nd of January. Just things go wrong. Things go wrong. And thus, we were left with a bit of a dodgy start to the stream, as always. I always want to get better at streaming, and it just gets worse, Tom. It just gets worse every time.
There is another issue, Keith, I'm afraid.
What's this? What's the issue?
You've got an echo.
I've got an echo. An echoey echo. Interesting. What about...
Yeah, bizarrely enough, myself and Rob don't seem to, but you do.
How about now? Do I have an echo now? We'll see.
We'll let YouTube catch up.
We'll let YouTube catch up. You can tell me if I'm echoing. It's all right if I sound like the Borg, though. I'm okay with that. So.
No, it's clear now.
It's clear now. I can see clearly now. Anyway, right. So let's. Wow, so many problems. This is what happens, guys, when you as I said, drink too much over New Year's and haven't really checked your setup for a while. But anyway, we're here. We're live. We have viewers. We're at the Romulans. I'm happy. You're happy. We're all happy to be here. And I'm actually even more happy, I'm going to add, because this, as everybody knows, is my favourite faction of all factions, the Romulan Star Empire, because they are the most cunning of all the Star Trek factions, if you like, the most conniving, the most deceitful, tricksters of the universe, if you like. some would say the Ferengi are, but actually I think the Romulans have an edge on the Ferengi. That's my view. And you guys can agree or disagree with me in chat. I don't mind. But the Romulan Star Empire is up today, and we're getting close, guys. We're getting really, really close to finishing our factional review, which means we're getting very, very close to a release date. And I had hoped to give you a present at Christmas, but things didn't pan out, and we're still waiting for some testing feedback, because this is the final edition, so it's got to be right, it's got to be good, it's got to be done when it's done. So as we always say, it's still a paradox. But yeah, Romulans, fair to say, an interesting faction, just to start off, because you can just build absolute tons of capital ships, which is the main thing that's always been kind of interesting about this faction. And I suppose I will let my two esteemed colleagues here just kind of give us a little bit of an overview, first of all, on the faction, and then we'll dive in, as always, to the ships. If you've got this kind of white, I'm going to try and keep my camera below this. Unfortunately, I spawned with a ring weld today, and I didn't have a chance to change it. So if I go up here, you can't really see things. But that's our lovely planet effects there kicking in. But first of all, Tom, do you want to tell us a bit sort of about how the Romulans economically play, and just their general tips for the guys here on the stream about what to kind of expect from a Romulan faction overall? And I'll let Rob talk a little bit about tactics in a second.
Yeah, so the Romulans overall, when you look at them in the Star Trek universe, they're very much an insular empire. They're vehemently xenophobic. The Remans are second-class citizens. And although the Remans are sort of the only species we see integrated into the empire, it's likely there are other subservient races that we've not seen on screen. So with that in mind, one of the ways that the Romulans do differ is that they've got a much weaker trade economy to other factions. The Federation being the wonderful xenophile, happy go-getter lovers of the universe that they are, apart from Captain Janeway. They love trading. They have the Ferengi on board. It's all about that commerce. The Romulans, on the other hand, because they're an insular empire, their trade is not as potent as that of other factions. But they do have quite a lot of things going for them. They have pretty good resource extraction technologies, with the tritanium and dilithium techs being merged together, so you don't have to separately research your metal and crystal upgrades. Following the advent from stock-sins, you can convert their trade into additional resource production bonus, which does have some pretty good percentage rates on there. So where you've got high-yield planets, you get a much greater return. And with the recent planet rework, which we keep harping on about over here, mostly because that was my doing, planets now have different resource values. So asteroids are the least valuable return of any sort of planet type. And in contrast, then, things like the Geomortius or the desert worlds or your home world and paradise planets, ancient planets, their resource yields are much higher. And as a consequence, those planets will also benefit far more from a resource extraction trade hub as a result of their higher base yields. Because it's percentage base, the higher the base yield is, the greater the percentage return. As far as their credit income is concerned, they have a very, very potent tax economy. Most factions can get away with social specializing their homeworld, for example, and developing their homeworld for increased population, and have very good tax returns on those planets. The Romulans take that a little bit further. Their culture stations have an ingrained tax income rate bonus, which at max level, I believe, provides 35% tax income rate bonus, in addition to allegiance bonuses in their Imperial Senate tree.
Yeah.
So you can end up with some very good tax economy. The increased allegiance improves your mineral output. And so maximizing sort of the planetary tax income and the resource output is where the Romulan economy shines best.
Okay, thank you very much. And Rob, what would you say from a kind of tactical point of view with the fleet? Like, how do the Romulans play as a fleet in general?
Yeah, so the Romulans have weaker cruisers statistically than all the other factions, but they have quite a few powerful abilities. And the biggest thing is just build lots of capital ships and level them up. There's tons of debuffs to the enemy fleet, buffs to your own fleet, cheeky abilities like on the Harrier, the Myotronic Beam, that weakens enemy ships quite drastically. There's just a lot of little things you can do if you're a player who likes to micro your abilities to get an edge.
Okay, brilliant. And let's, I think, jump straight into the ship, shall we? So as always, because mostly it's not me talking, guys, which I always like. It's these guys talking. I'll start with the scout ship because that's the easiest one of all the factions, which is why I always do it. So I get away with not getting things wrong then in my own mod. So we have the Lenora class, a very, very little diddy scout. And as per normal, it is the Lenora class. No, it's not. What am I on about? It's the Talon. I chose the wrong ship. It's the Talon class scout, which was actually featured. I can't remember the name of the episode. It was with the Defector.
The shuttle.
The shuttlecraft. But I forgot to remember the name of it, so it's gone out of my head now. But yes, you may recognise this very, very famous Romulan shuttlecraft here. And as per usual, you have the Explorer, which you can send it out to scout. It doesn't have cloak. It used to have cloak a long time ago, but we found that was a bit too powerful in multiplayer matches for these to have an edge with cloak. But it does have the usual tachyon pulse to decloak ships. And the detection of minefields. So it's quite handy to have, especially if you're playing against another Romulan player or another Klingon player that has deployed mines. Very, very useful little scout. And that is your Talon class. And then I guess we're going to come straight onto the first combat ship, which, Tom, I'm going to let you take away today, which is the Hawk.
The Hawk. So the regular frigate for the Romulans. I say, pretending to know what I'm talking about. I do know what I'm talking about. I just need to find the right spreadsheet. It's obviously your starting frigate, and like the Federation and Klingons, it has the same sort of stat loadout. Very light armor, anti-medium weapons. Nothing particularly special in that regard. Where it does sort of come into its own is, as with everything with the Romulans, it has a cloak that you can utilize, and it does have a damage over time ability attached to its main weapons.
Yes.
So I believe the damage taken per second is capital ability damage type.
Good question.
Good question.
I can't remember now how the plasma burn damage applies, but I think it might either be. I will have to check. I think it's composite, possibly.
Okay.
But I will double check.
So broadly speaking, it will do good damage to everything, even though it's anti-medium itself. That damage over time should do quite good damage to most things that it affects. So it has that little edge over its competitors.
You're trying to do a lovely, demonstration of ships, and then a Federation scout just, invades your Romulan territory. Just typical, really. We'll just blow it up. There you go. Go away, Feds. Better, there you go. Better not Fed. Okay, so
better dead than dead, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. Better dead than fed. So I'll just get for all my ships to get themselves back into my lovely position. I did have a nice position sorted out for all these, and the Feds ruined it, as always. I think I can't remember. I think it may be composite damage, but I will double check that in a little while while you guys are talking about another ship, if I can get it up sneakily on my second monitor. But that is the humble Hawk, and the plasma burn. It's fair to say you'll see a theme on a lot of the frigates and the cruisers, because is one thing that's always worth noting with the frigates and cruisers on the Romulans, because you do get such a large amount of capital ships, they're actually a lot weaker than their other factional counterparts. So it's something to bear in mind that while they still do use the counter system that we've been talking about for the last few factional videos, these are generally a little bit weaker than their factional counterparts because you're getting so much more out of having the capital ships. So
yeah, the Hawk is an exception, though. The Hawk is like the best starter frigate by far.
Yeah, Hawk is a fantastic starter frigate. Yeah, absolutely. And that plasma burn, because it's an on chance, so it has a chance to apply a plasma burn on its weapons. There's a good chance. I think it's 20% per shot, something like that, off the top of my head. So really good starter frigate. Probably the best. Well, I don't know. I quite like the Razalak as well, but that's just me. So, Rob, do you want to talk to us? What shall I give you next? Let's do the Corvette, I suppose. Let's go on to the humble but not so humble Shrike class, which was a fan favourite in Armada 2 as well.
My crew is ready.
That's right. All right. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing right now because I've got the stream up. So there's a delay.
Yeah.
No, it's just a delay on the stream. So I was like watching you hover over the Lenora, and I was going, "What's he doing?" So I wasn't watching in the Discord. All right, the Shrike is another unique case for a Corvette. Normally, the Corvettes are sort of the anti-very light ship, but in the case of the Romulans, they're it's an anti-heavy ship. So the Shrike will basically punch up very effectively, and this kind of gives the Romulans, I would say, a fair advantage in the early mid-game, because there's not a ton of great anti-heavy options for most other factions this early, and this can help the Romulans defend themselves while they establish that a little bit more complex economy.
Absolutely.
On top of that, the Shrike has a little stacking shield buff that just basically makes it a little bit tankier.
Yep.
It can cloak, and I do believe it has plasma burn as well now, which was just added. So that's also very, very powerful. So this is a wonderful little ship.
Yeah, wonderful little ship. And I think that's the real thing. If you remember, all the Corvettes, as Rob was just alluded to there, are slightly different. So you're starting to see those factional differences. So the Romulans are very much masters of dealing with large capital vessels. So when they were designing the Shrike, they were looking for a Corvette that could really punch up, as Rob said there. And that cannot be underestimated as an early advantage against capital ships, which are some of the tougher ships now in the game to take down. And we listened to a lot of the feedback and complaints from the previous releases about SA3, and people felt that their capital ships just weren't tough enough. And as we've said before, capital ships are a lot tougher now. So this is definitely an advantage for the Romulans, and one you should abuse. Just a reminder that the actual shield formation stack on all Corvettes, so for their individual abilities, will all stack up to 20 times. So the more Corvettes you have, the more powerful that becomes. This one actually does have a negative, though, because it is such a powerful Corvette that its evasion does drop off the more you stack. So it's just something to be aware of, because it does have to have a weakness as well, because it is a very powerful Corvette, and just something to be aware of. So, Rob, I think that does bring us finally onto the... not Rob, sorry, Tom. That does bring us onto the Lenora, which is this ugly duckling here. Do you want to tell us a bit about the Lenora?
It is the ugly duckling. So the Lenora historically has been the anti-strike craft vessel for the Romulans. That's still the case. Medium armor type, anti-very light weaponry. It is your flak. As with everything with the Romulans, it can cloak. So if your Lenoras start taking focus fire from an enemy that's planning to try and take you out with strikecraft, you can sort of dodge that by activating the cloak on the Lenora. It has a covert evasive ability, which allows it to more quickly move into position to intercept enemy strikecraft. Being quite a small ship itself, it's not exactly a slow, clunky thing to maneuver. And it does come with a tachyon burst of its own to decloak those pesky Klingons that have frequently skirmished with the Romulans along their own neutral zone.
Absolutely. I think this model was from Legacy, from memory, from original. I wish Max was here actually to tell us, but I think it is a Legacy model as well. So it's an older model, but it still looks really good, and the glow is fantastic, obviously, in Sins as well. So Maybe a little bit of an ugly duckling. Let us know in the chat if you actually like this ship, if you think it looks good or not. I'm interested to see what people think. But I think she's quite an interesting one, quite ugly. When I first saw her, I actually thought this was the front. When I first saw the model, and then I remembered that this is the front and this is the back. So yeah, an interesting ship to be sure. And that kind of brings us nicely. I'm trying to find the other frigate. There it is. Rob, to the Raptor class. You want to tell us a little bit about the Raptor, which actually is a lovely ship.
Yeah, Torpedo Frigate. The anti-very heavy, has very light armor, or let's see, is it light or very light armor? It's hard to remember everything.
So many changes.
It is light armor, okay. Yeah. I thought so. 1 second, sorry, I've got my family in the background and I don't want to have them talking into the stream.
That's okay. So again, interesting, as Rob was saying there, torpedo ship does fire like the Steam Runner and other classes. It punches quite high above its weight. So again, another ship, you'll see the theme here, that can punch above its weight. And comes really lovingly with the plasma burn as well. So interestingly about this one, having the plasma burn is actually a real advantage on a torpedo ship, because you're not only getting that torpedo damage, you're actually applying plasma burn dots as well from long range. So it's actually a very, very nasty little torpedo boat. And in terms of the model, I mean, you can see the design aesthetic there coming on from the Directive.
Baby Directive, yeah.
We call this there the Baby Directive. Very, very nice, very, very Bird of Prey style, kind of with the hawk talon there. So yeah, very, 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 very nice with the beak. But yeah, actually one of my favourite looking ships actually. So very, very interesting.
I like it as well. Yeah, it's very nice.
Very, very interesting. So that, what am I missing? Any frigates there? I think that's all the frigates, isn't it? Have I missed a frigate? Have I missed? I have.
Do you count the Wing Defender as a frigate? I mean, technically, yes.
I mean,
the frigate list.
It is. It's one of the oldest Romulan designs, Tom. Which brings me over to you next, of course, to talk about the Wind Defender.
The Wing Defender. Well, it's your planetary siege ship. It's gone through a couple of iterations. At one stage, it was the long-range siege ship for anti-starbase duties. That was an error that was not realised for quite some time. What's to say? It looks like a hawk in flight. It's got some circular red engines at the back, which, as we've discussed with the Klingon stream, that just means it can go faster, because bright red circular engines means more power. It will do the job quite well of sieging out a planet, and as with same with the Klingon Predator, you can cloak, so you can sort of sneak by and start sieging whilst your opponent is looking elsewhere, or their ships are auto-attacking to somewhere else in the gravity well. And it comes with the plasma burn, so its own weapons, which, whilst not particularly extravagant, is a planetary siege vessel after all, have that little extra punch.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually brings us to the end of the frigates already, and we come on to our first cruiser, Rob, which is the Dominus class. This interesting looking boat.
This is another unique ship because it takes on the role of sort of the fleet repair ship, the fleet repair cruiser, as well as it's the carrier. So this thing has strike craft. This thing can repair other ships. It's got medium armor and anti-light weapons, so it's good against those corvettes. And the strike craft can have anti-very light weapons, so it's even arguably good against the starter frigates as well. This thing's a good all-around ship, and it's very necessary in the Romulan fleet to have these. And it also captures things. So actually, it's like 3 things. It's kind of a crazy ship.
It is. I think this is fair to say, out of all the light carriers, this is probably the one to watch out for if you are playing in multiplayer games against friends or playing with friends. If you are playing using it against the AI, this is a brilliant all-round ship, as Rob just alluded to there. and one that we're very proud of. So this is definitely a ship, interestingly, where we usually say carriers, you don't want too many, and this is actually one that you probably want quite a few of because it's so
You're
versatile.
going to build these, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really versatile. And obviously, like most Romulan ships, it can cloak as well. So really fantastic little ship, and you're going to want it for that anti-frigate work. It's fair to say the Romulans, while they do have the Hawk, which is an excellent frigate, when you want to start punching down a little bit with some cruisers, this is the one that you probably want the most. So
well, you're going to have to get these anyways to contest into neutral asteroids. You're going to have to get them to kind of get that little bonus with the strike craft. These are something you're going to need.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us nicely on to another one of my favourite ships, Tom, which is the Griffin class, which is the electronic warfare ship.
Yeah, so the Griffin is now a little bit of an oddball, it must be said. It has heavy armor and it has very light weaponry. It doesn't have plasma burn like its compatriots. It has a disrupt engines ability, reducing max speed, acceleration, turn rate, and chance to hit. And it does also have a warp field inhibitor. So what that does is it kind of operates like an interdiction ability, in that it increases the warp drive charge up rate by 5,000%. How much that translates to in time, I'm not entirely sure. Probably something we should check at some point. But given that Armada 3 jump out times are quite quick to begin with, it's not like stock Sins where there's a good few seconds of charge up time before actually going. Here, ships reach the edge of the world, they turn, pretty much they're out of there. So the 5,000% charge up time actually means that the ships in question will be there for a few seconds more.
I've tested it. So I know how long they'll be there for.
There we go.
I can
Keith
tell
knows.
you they will actually be there for about 40 seconds. It's a very long
seconds.
time.
Whoa.
And the thing that always made this interesting, which is why I think people tend to overlook the Griffin, but it actually can target capital ships. So if you know how to use your Griffins well, and I think Rob will talk about this a bit later in a little bit more kind of advanced tactics of the Romulans, you can literally, especially if you're playing again in multiplayer, or even if you are playing the AI in some ways, because they do retreat, they like to run away as well. If you want to snipe a ship's engines out and stop it from actually being able to warp away, the Romulans have that distinct advantage that the Griffin is the ship to do it. Now they're quite fragile as a ship, as we said. They're generally more fragile, but it's a fantastic sort of sniper ability to just target that very all important capital ship and stop it from warping out. So if you're in because the Romulans are pretty slow as a fleet in general, they're not one of the fastest factions with all their heavy ships. So the Griffin really fills that nice, unique spot of allowing the Romulan players to kind of really target those capital ships and catch up. So and you know, there's something to be said, like, because you can target capital ships. If you target you know, like something important like a Nebula class, or you know, something the player's really going to need. There's a lot to be said for that. So really fantastic little ability. And what I just wanted to point out is the Griffin doesn't actually need to be that close to fire it off. It's quite a long range.
It's a sizable range. Yeah.
So very, very powerful little ship, but a bit fragile. And again, not really specialised for taking down cruisers. It's good at frigates.
No, its ship role really is an anti-frigate and anti-corvette role. It's designed in such a way that with heavy armor, it's quite resistant to lower end ships and punches very effectively downwards.
Yeah.
Similar in some ways to the Intrepid, but more effective against the corvettes than the frigates, whereas the Intrepid is more effective against frigates than corvettes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lovely ship design as well. Very rare. I think this is a legacy model again. So yeah, that is the Griffin. Very interesting ship. So Tom, I'm going to stick with you for the White Wind class. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the White Wind? It's a very ugly Duckling.
Very ugly Duckling. Very much so. It is the standard anti-module starbase killer. The usual loadout of activate siege mode, enable siege mode, and activate cloak. Something we were looking at recently was whether the siege mode was working as we intended it to. And it turns out, unfortunately, which it looks like there has been updated in the string. There is a charge up time of 30 seconds before the damage output buff applies, so it's not an instantaneous thing. You've got to sort of sit it out of range for a little bit, wait for the charge up time to occur, and then you get the damage output bonus.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you should, and all sea ships should work in a similar fashion. You should see this bobbing above their head, guys, and you've got to sit them there. And of course, they lose their engines. They can't regenerate health, and there you can see it's now activated. But if you look, that its weapons fire slower, but the damage is increased by 500%. So that is very, very, very good. But in return, because they're sitting still, you can see that they're going to take that damage reduction debuff, meaning they're actually going to take 45% more damage than they would normally. So you've really got to try and play your artillery ships quite carefully and decide when you're going to put them into siege mode. They have absolutely fantastic range and can outrange star bases. But I have a feeling, and we'll come on to later why, you might not build many of these as the Romulans. They have them, but you might not build many, and we'll explain why a little bit later. And that brings us nicely, Rob, onto, I think, one of your favourites. Again, it's not the prettiest of ships, but it's a damn good one, and that is the Heavy Defender class.
Yeah, Heavy Defender, it's heavy armor, anti-medium weapons, so it's good against essentially all the sort of mid-game cruisers, like just comparing it to other Romulan ships, it would be good against the Dominus. I guess that's the only medium armor
Wing Defender,
Romulan
Lenora.
one. Okay, yeah. So, those are frigates, though, not cruisers, but...
Yeah.
Anyways, the point is this is basically anti-medium, and it has the anti-cloak ability, and it has this emergency defenses here, which gives it some more shield restore rate, which you can argue whether or not it's the greatest thing, but the best thing about this ship is that it's relatively tanky, it's relatively affordable, and it essentially gives you one of the pieces you need in your fleet to deal well in the mid game.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, this has changed from the previous version. It now has its own variant of plasma burn, the heavy plasma burn, which is essentially double the amount of plasma. So you're getting double. It's buy one, get one free on plasma burning today, which makes the Heavy Defender, again, a very, very powerful ship. Very tanky, very powerful ship.
They added that recently, so I actually didn't know it. Well, they told me, but I couldn't remember. Every ship that they told me had the plasma burn. This is amazingly strong.
Yeah, amazing. I think Rob's really excited to actually play Romulans again soon. Caesar, Tom, that kind of brings us to our last cruiser to talk about, which is I would say humble, but not so humble, Falcon class, which is a very modern Romulan vessel, cutting edge.
It is.
Some would say.
Is. When you look at the model design, it's got that more up-to-date Romulan plate design. Very heavy cruiser. Not too much to say there. Very heavy armor, anti-heavy weapon loadout. Has a direct combat ability called Plasma Barrage, which deals some damage and reduces armor on targets that are hit. I believe it's a forward cone.
It is. So it kind of
so it will affect it, although it has because of the way Sins does its ability sort of range finding. Although it shows an AoE around it, it is a forward cone effect. So it shouldn't affect ships behind.
Yeah.
The duration is not great, but when you've got multiple Falcons in your fleet, potentially staggering that ability, you're able to quite significantly armor strip your opponent's vessels, which gives them a little bit of an edge against other heavy cruisers in other factions' fleets. As with most of the Romulan cruisers, it comes with a tachyon emitter, so it can decloak those pesky rival Klingons that constantly trouble the frontiers. And it does come with the heavy plasma burn that the Heavy Defender and Harpy also come with. And as always, it has a cloak. A running theme of the Romulan faction.
And that kind of I actually forgot about the Harpy. I apologise. I think like what I'm missing a ship, aren't I?
You are.
And it is the very different looking. But Rob, I'm gonna let you talk about this one. The Harpy.
We lie in the shadows.
Yeah, so I'm just answering a couple questions in the chat really quickly.
Okay.
So they were just asking about the Harpy. So the Harpy's been changed. It's kind of like a late game Corvette, as strange as that sounds. If to the people who haven't been tuning in on these streams, what it's gonna do is it's got light armor, but it's anti-heavy, very heavy. So this thing, and the reason this is so good is because all of the late game ships, the really advanced cruisers such as the Falcon, are going to have heavy armor, and they're going to have likely anti-heavy or very heavy weapons. So when they're shooting at these, because of the light armor type, they're going to do very little damage, and when these shoot at them, they're going to hit them very, very hard. So these are kind of like an advanced Corvette, to answer your question there, Dead Soul. On top of that, this ship has always had the plasma burn. This is the ship of plasma burn originally, and I do believe its other ability, damage. Yeah, it's a direct damage, and it takes away some speed from the enemy ship. So good for slowing down capital ships so you can snipe them. You've always used these as kind of capital snipers, anyways, and now they fit that role better than ever with their armor type being changed and their weapon types being changed.
Yeah, very, very powerful. A little bit of history about the Harpy, just from a lore perspective, where it originally came from, was again I think it was a legacy design, and the key with this was if you know your sort of history around these models, because a lot of it's memory beta kind of canon, but effectively the Romulans very sneakily, the Tal Shiar stole some designs after witnessing the Federation Defiant class, and they came up with something just as agile and tough as the Defiant in the Harpy. So there you go. And what I do love about the Harpy is this kind of forward swept winds. It is very, very kind of iconic bird of prey. And when I say bird of prey, I don't mean obviously the Klingon one, but I'm talking about, if you think about some of the animals in the world today, a lot of them do have these kind of forward swept winds. So I love that kind of design.
Almost, if you're a fan of Stargate as well, you've got that Death Glider
kind of feel
similarity.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really lovely ship. And that's the frigates and cruisers, guys. They're interesting, but that's not why you're here. I know what you're going to say, Bane. We're not here for the frigates and the cruisers. We all know that if you're going to talk about Romulans, it's all about the capital ships. And that is true. When you're playing Romulans, it is all about the capital ships, which Tom kind of brings us nicely to our first capital ship of the day, which is the Vengeance class.
Tis more brave to live.
The Vengeance, the old man of the Romulan fleet.
The old man. Very, very. I always think it's missing a bridge, but it's not. It's right here. But it feels like it feels like. Are you sure you weren't a Klingon ship once with a kind of front? But yeah.
Should have something coming out the front.
Yes, absolutely.
It's your starting colony. Capital ship. So as always, it has a colonize ability. It has a cost reduction applied to the ability, so it reduces the cost of all upgrades on the planet for an X duration, 360 seconds by default, but that increases with levels, as does the cost reduction. So what you potentially get there by investing in the extra levels of colonize is far more cost-effective colonization going into the mid-game, and cost reduction in the early game when you're trying to save as much money as possible is always good. Mm-hmm. It has an AoE graviton flux field, which reduces the weapon range of enemy ships, their chance to hit, and their max speed. A Tal Shiar infiltrator. So this one's a little bit more niche, I have to be honest. Unlike the Ambassador for the Federation, which just gets a nice, I'm going to Argus array this planet somewhere else in the galaxy, it targets a ship.
It does. And
then provides a visible duration for that time. If anything, I'd be inclined to say we could probably buff the duration of this ability, because at level 1, it's only 60 seconds. depending on what it is you actually use it on, you're not going to get much telemetry back. So I think possibly that would be a way to improve the way we use the ability, possibly increase the range at which it can be targeted. So you can potentially spy on enemy scouts that are floating through your space in the early game and help them help you scout for you through them. And then you have a direct target propulsion ability, which you use on one ship, and again reduces max speed, acceleration, and turn rate. So when you stagger that with the graviton flux field and potentially the Harpy, you gain the capacity to keep your opponents close by.
Yes. Which the Romulans sorely need, because they are very, very slow. Very slow.
Yeah, there's a couple other really fun ways to keep people close by that we'll get to in a minute too.
Yeah. I think it's also worth noting the first bit is the Romulans really the strength of the capital fleet is in these powerful debuffs, and the debuffs do start to stack up. So they have lots of ways to apply chance to hit debuffs, which is quite interesting. And you'll see a theme running through the Romulan fleet as we go from ship to ship. But let's jump to our second ship of the day. Rob, let's talk about the Directive, the iconic Romulan ship, some would say.
Oh yeah, so the Directive has a couple of abilities that fortify its shields by draining opponent's shields, and then it also has an AoE debuff. Shield in let's see, the gravitic shockwave, which does some damage over time and also has a debuff to the enemy's chance to hit. And like Keith was saying, this will stack very quickly. And then the other thing that it has is it's got a fleet cloak, so it can cloak your whole fleet around it basically in an area. Very nice ability if you're trying to escape and your opponent has neglected detection.
Yeah, I just want to kind of highlight some of the changes to these in a little bit more detail. So the shield inversion beam, which we felt in the previous edition, it wasn't used a lot, and we have completely overhauled the amount of damage taken. This is actually a suggestion by Caesar, by Tom here, and now I think we feel that this is going to be an ability that you'll want to use more on your Directives rather than just absorption and gravitic shockwave. And what you can see there is this is at level 2 at the moment, but as you level up your Directive, this becomes very, very potent. So this lasts for 6 seconds, and what it will do is it will do at level 2 here, it's doing 165 damage a second for 6 seconds, while restoring 165 shields to your Directive. And that it goes up and up as you increase the level of it. And so that actually is a very, very strong ability now. So if you didn't use it before because you felt it didn't really give me much, now I think it's a real take or choice. So we've really given you a nice choice on the Directive about using this, and I think we like it, Caesar, don't we, as a good pick now in capital combat.
Yeah, essentially you could go with a raw heal self with shield mitigation and shield restore, or you could essentially go through a sort of shield theft, shield steal of your opponent's vessels. Potentially even both.
I've always thought this was a
stack it. Whereas previously it was always a constant duration. I think we might have had a slight miscommunication on the duration that we've set with 3, 6, 9, 12, because previously it was always 11.
Yeah.
The cooldown time being quite low and the antimatter cost being quite low means it is an attractive ability for keeping the Directives alive.
Very, very attractive. So the durations might change a little bit, guys, as always, subject to change. The absorption layer is still very, very good, giving you that shield mitigation, which you don't get a lot of in other factions. There's a little bits of it, but the Directive is still a very, very strong ship. And of course, because we're at full research, this is the third variant of the Directive. You may remember that as you go along, the Directive actually gets more and more powerful. And what that does is that, if you never noticed, it actually adds additional weaponry banks to the Directive. So it becomes a very, very powerful endgame ship as well.
And it updates the model.
And it does update the model. It does change the textures.
It modernizes it.
It modernizes it. So you will actually see all the variants of the Directive as you go through. So really, really fantastic. It doesn't work against Borg if you're trying to shield invert a Borg, because the Borg do not have shields. It will do damage to them, but it won't restore your shields. So there you go. Sad, sad, sad. But that's the Borg for you. They're mean. Caesar, shall we talk about my next sort of favourite ship? And this ship, to be fair, has had a lot of work done on it as well, which is the very imposing Buzzard class.
My crew is ready.
Yeah, so the Buzzard is something we've re-examined recently. It's a very standard sort of damage/support vessel. So it has a direct combat ability in the supercharged torpedo, which is a flat damage and a damage over time. It has decoy drones, which is probably the main reason most people use the Buzzard. It spawns in 2 drones, which then have a taunt applied to them, which draws fire away from other ships in your fleet onto the drones. And the capacity for and the value of that style of ability can't really be overstated. Janeway, for example, with her deploy Holo Fleet, is the same sort of manner. It's spawning ships to take fire away from other things. And so the Buzzard, not only in itself with Winged Fortress, is very tanky, the decoy drones, by extension, create additional damage sponges away from your important vessels. Where we have re-examined the Buzzard is the siege mode. So the problem with the Buzzard in the past as a siege ship, which is what its intended role was, the plasma torpedo damage is actually module. It's not capital ship. And the idea behind it is that you have a capital ship that is capable of sieging starbases effectively.
Yes.
The problem was, when it came to actually attacking the starbase, the Buzzard had to go very comfortably within range of the starbase. And starbase damage output is very powerful. As such, attempting to fly in with Buzzards and to use siege mode, the damage output of the Buzzard really did not make it a viable strategy for dealing with starbases, because you would lose your Buzzard. And generally speaking, you don't want to lose capital ships in such a clumsy manner. So we have now updated the Buzzard's range of its torpedoes. So like the White Wind, it now has the capacity to outrange or be at the extreme end of a starbase's range, where it can more safely use those anti-module torpedoes against the starbase. And if you're using a couple of Buzzards with decoy drones, you can quite viably now have a non-cruiser means, a capital ship means, instead of attacking starbases with the Romulan capital ships.
Which I think is just fantastic. So, being able to have such a tanky ship, obviously it will take more damage in siege mode, but having such a powerfully tanky ship, bombarding star bases from afar. Again, if you're playing multiplayer or playing against AI-built star bases, this is the thing to have. Very, very, very good ship, and gives you a way to really deal with those kind of pesky star bases, because star bases are really tough to take down without siege ships at all. So, I think this is definitely one to watch. I'm hoping you guys will start to use it more.
Fingers crossed it will lean into that siege role more rather than just the support tank role.
Yeah. I've always loved and used this ship just because it's tanky and it's got the decoy drones, but now there's just an added reason to use it. It's just fantastic, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rob, this is going to kind of bring us on to the Harrier class. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this chunky boy?
All right. Yeah, this is the carrier, the capital ship carrier. It has a few abilities. It has the hangar bay ability, obviously, to bring in extra strike craft. It has Myotronic beam, which essentially massively nerfs an enemy ship that you target, as well as does a little bit of direct damage. And this is great for using, in tandem with your Harpies or anything else to kind of like Tavaras to snipe capital ships. Then it has an area debuff, plasma implosion there, which also it does some chance to hit negation as well as some damage over time. And then I believe its final ability is it's advanced strikecraft. So it's a nice buff to your strikecraft. And this is a great ship. You should always have one or two of these, if for nothing else, just for the Myotronic beam. But because carriers are so much more useful in this version, I think you'll want to have probably 4 or 5 of these. I like them.
Yeah, and I think the interesting about Myotronic beam is we talk about the support class ships. This, again, is an ability that can be used on dreadnoughts. So, if the enemy does have a dreadnought and you want to seriously bring that dreadnought down in both weapon cooldown and energy weapon cooldown and its damage output, this is the boy to take. This is where you want to use that Myotronic beam to really just hamper that dreadnought. And as Rob said there, if you've got 3 or 4 of these, you're actually substantially bringing that dreadnought down for a prolonged period of time, and that kind of damage reduction on something as powerful as a dreadnought class, so a Titan class, is really, really impactful in those battles. So really, really fantastic ship to have. Very, very strong now with its carrier fighters. We are going to look a little bit of tweaking on the fighters and the elite fighters, because we think we've now got carriers to the point where they're actually very, very strong. But it's still true that, again, you want this in your fleet, but remember we talked about the tactics in our last couple of videos. There's no harm in actually sending a Harrier, because it's quite tanky, it's quite capable of defending itself, off on a flank to take out logistic structures, which it will do very, very handily with its bombers. So it's a very, very, very strong ship. So, definitely, guys, if you've not used carriers in your fleets before, as we keep echoing, carriers do have a place now, whether on flanking manoeuvres, because, there's much more advantages in this version of SA3 of not deathballing and actually having 2 fleets, or having a few ships that are attacking a different flank to really give you an edge as a player. So something to consider moving forward. And we'll talk a little bit more about tactics with Rob at the end of the ship review. And I think, Tom, that brings us to the kind of the super support ship for the Romulan players, which really does get a lot of hate, I know, from the player base, in terms of if it's been used against you, you feel very, very sad, and that is the Shadow class.
We'll take it in turns, Rob, shall we? I'll do holographic fleet. You do psionic burst. I'll get the boring remote defense here, and you can talk about singularity projector. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll take it in turns. So holographic fleet, as with the decoy drones, spawns temporary holographic Griffins, because Griffins are a mighty, strong vessel, with which to draw enemy fire via a taunt. So similar to the decoy drone, it's another way that you can draw fire away from your important vessels and onto other less important targets, indirectly boosting the survivability of your fleet without directly providing abilities that directly buff the ship itself. The sort of exception there is the Directive, but the Directive, as the sort of self-nominated mainstay tank of the Romulan fleet, is sort of deserving of those abilities itself. So it's a way of having a support buff, survivability buff,
My
that
life for the Empire.
a little bit niche, but is very effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer your question, Freebus, yes, the Griffins don't actually do any damage. As you can see, they all have a value of 0 damage. So because
they're holographic ships.
They're holographic ships. They don't fire any. There's no actual ships there.
No, you guys say that, but tell that to the Borg who died in the holodeck when Jean-Luc Picard pulled out the Tommy gun. Just saying.
He turned off the safety protocols.
Yeah. The power required to replicate that in space would be immense. So, but there we go. And that brings us nicely on to the second ability. I like this. We're doing back and forth on abilities now, just for this ship.
Yeah.
The Psionic
This
Blast.
this is one of my favorite ships, so I got a little bit greedy here and I had to get in on this. But that ability right there, Psionic Blast, when you fire that, it does this chance to hit debuff in this area around it, but it also makes all the ships there just start spinning around in circles in all kinds of random directions. It ruins their targeting banks, it makes their damage output less. Just because of that, it takes their chance to hit down in a large area, and it holds them in place. That ability right there is like probably one of the strongest abilities on a capital ship in the entire game. It's so good.
And it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful.
You spin me round, right round. So that's the side of it. I think it's always funny. There was a time when I think this ability, and it might even still do it, but I think if you detonate this, or at the time, you could detonate it near a starbase. I don't know if it does it anymore, but you could detonate it near a starbase, and you could actually knock the starbase off kilter. And I remember someone in a few versions ago detonated one right next to a mushroom starbase, and the mushroom starbase actually ended upside down in the gravity well. It was very, very bizarre and weird to see, but
I think Denatra has is it Denatra? One of the heroes has an ability. I think it might be Sela actually.
Yeah, Sela.
Has this ability, and I think it does still affect starbases. I think I've seen that recently.
Yeah. So there you go. Nothing like a spinning starbase. Rolling, says Drastasticus. So yeah. And then that kind of brings us to I would say this is boring season. This is actually not too bad, but we'll go for it because there's an important reason it's there. So remote defense field, Tom.
Yeah, so the Romulans, to correct Rob slightly earlier on the Dominus, the Romulans don't have a hull restore ability on any of their ships. And you'll notice when you look at Romulan ships, they have substantially more shields than hull. Fundamentally, this is just because Romulan shield technology and Romulan ship design...
Did I say hull restore earlier?
You said hull restore.
I meant shield restore.
Meant
oh
shield
my
restore.
goodness. I misspoke.
Healing is healing, shields or hull, but yeah, it's shield restore, not hull restore. So the thing to keep in mind is if you do lose your shields, shield mitigation, for example, still applies. Armor values still matter, but you do have less hull. You are more fragile than your peers. So looking after your shield health is definitely important. And so remote defense field it's one of those abilities that initially looks pretty pants. I mean, it's a 12-second shield restore. It only affects 4 ships. It only lasts 10 seconds. It's 120 shields, which spread over 4 ships is 480 shields. So it's not awful, but it's not fantastic. The reason remote defense field gets overlooked so much is because it does have very good side abilities. But with levels, remote defense field goes from 12 shields on 4 targets to 36 shields on 12 targets over 16 seconds. It is a lot of shields to be restoring in the middle of combat. And so fundamentally, if you do spec into multiple shadows, there is not necessarily a reason for all of them to have Singularity Projector, for all of them to have Psionic Blast.
Absolutely.
You could argue that all of them should have Holographic Fleet, because the more ships you have drawing fire, the better. But Remote Defense Field, having a couple of them with that ability, is a very effective addition to the Dominus's Shield Restore. Because ultimately it has only a 30-second cooldown. It's a very quick cooldown, and so you get a lot of shield restore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's often overlooked, and I think what we try to do is we try to encourage players to think about when they're leveling their ships. And I actually think this is a good segue here before we continue to the last one, which I know Rob's itching to get to, but just to talk a little bit from a tech tree point of view about the changes here, Tom, if you can, to the trainable levels across the factions and particularly the Romulans who benefit.
Yeah, so the Romulans, in the past, Romulans like the Borg have a passive experience rate. So when you research, it's tier 8 tech in the Imperial Zenetrary under Sovereign Advancement. It grants an experience rate over time. In the current public release, that is a rate level cap of 4, but has a very slow experience rate gain. As a consequence, in the mid to late game, if you get this tech, where time is of the essence, you will be wanting to get your capital ships to higher levels to maximize your ability usage. But because of the slow rate of experience gain, if you're in a rush and a hurry, and let's face it, unless you're fighting AI, and sometimes even when you're fighting AI, you don't have the time to spare waiting for them to level up, you'll purchase levels. And the Romulans have the great advantage of being able to buy their way to level 6. In the Republic release level 7, but we've toned this down slightly, so for most factions it's level 5, for Romulans it will be level 6. And what we've done now instead is provide glory to the Empire on a far more limited capacity. It only levels capital ships level 3. But once you have the research, the experience rate per second is set to, I believe, 100 on first level and 200 on the second level. That tick number doesn't particularly matter too much, because once you reach the rate level cap, you're there. But it means your capital ships will, for free, once you have that tech, reach level 3 almost instantaneously. So rather than having a capital ship out the shipyard that's level 1, you'll effectively have a capital ship out of the shipyard that's level 3. And the intention is, because the Romulans have 22 capital ships, if you lose, say, 6 capital ships in one go, not only do you have to spend rather a lot of cash on your capital ships to rebuild them, you've then got to wait for the time to purchase the levels. We're essentially reducing the wait time to get them to that higher level, and reducing the cost by a marginal amount. It's, I believe, 1,000 for the first level, and 1,250 for the first level, 1,500 for the second level. Yeah. So we're reducing the cost of needing to level them up by about 2,750. You can still then purchase the additional levels to the Romulans, but you no longer have to wait the several minutes to reach the rate level cap that you did before. So you're not feeling like you're having to make a choice between, do I want to wait the X amount of time it would take for them to reach this level and then purchase the subsequent ones? You're now being granted the capacity to get to that level quickly, and then you can decide if you want to purchase the additional levels.
Yeah. And it's fair to add, I think, that across the other factions, what we have done is we've toned the amount of purchasable levels down on the other factions by 1 level. So the Romulans do have a distinct edge, as do the Borg, over the other factional counterparts. Yeah. And that's because it can be extremely devastating losing a lot of Romulan cap ships in a push. So this gives you, as a Romulan player, because we have, as we talked about, we removed the bonus credits, which is what we were doing as an effect, which obviously made the resource timers look a bit funny for a lot of you when you were playing. And we took that feedback, we removed that system. And by having such, going back to a kind of more stock-based system of tax and upkeep, meant that there was an issue with the Romulans actually being able to afford to maintain such a large capital fleet. And it could often feel as a Romulan player that once you lost your fleet in a bad case
engagement,
it was hard to recover. So this is our way of helping you as a Romulan player recover a little bit more quickly. As my final purchasable level, I can't purchase anymore, just to show you. So you can get to a 7, which quite nicely. So yeah, it's just a way of us helping you as a Romulan player get back to combat readiness in a much shorter time. Because you are so reliant, as I said, with the cruisers and frigates being a bit weaker, you're very reliant on your capital ships being alive to win the day. So that's that. Let's go on to the last ability, though, Rob, the Singularity Projector.
Yeah, I mean, this basically just shuts a ship down and does some damage to it. This is a good ability, but actually this is the one I use the least on this ship, because why not just have 6 of these with Psionic Blast and just take auto cast off and then tab through them and keep people spinning forever, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The nice thing about this is it does turn off abilities. So if you do use it, it is pretty good, and the damage has just been tweaked a little bit, so it should go up as you.
You should always have it on a couple just to target like specific capital ships or like enemy heroes.
I feel like I should nerf Silent Blast a little bit because Rob likes it too much. Tom, what do you reckon?
You've already nerfed it.
I have nerfed it already a little bit. So that's the shadow. What I will just highlight with the shadow is actually. If you look, it's actually a little bit weaker than the other caps. So, I mean, not that much, obviously, but something to be aware of is that shadows are very, very powerful ships, but they're not the toughest of ships, and it's something you should just bear in mind. That if you are playing, especially against other players, they will likely try and target your shadows first as a target priority, because as they should. And if you are playing against a Romulan player or a person that's played Romulans, you want to be targeting the shadows early on in your combat engagements with focus fire, because they just add so much to the Romulan fleet. And then this brings me on quite nicely to another ship that's had a hell of a lot of work, actually. It used to be quite weak because of the shield mitigation debuffs that were applied to it and its bigger brother. But it brings me on to the Valdor, Tom. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Valdor class?
Yeah, so the Valdor and the Tavara, I would say just before we start, the biggest change with the Valdor contrasted to the Tavara is actually their placement in the research tree. And there have been a couple of movements where that's concerned. So something to keep in mind is that the Didera Dex has been reduced to tier 3. So the Buzzard and the Didera Dex are now at the same tier unlock. So whereas the Didera Dex you can just research off the bat, the Buzzard you do need to research the Raptor first, but they're more accessible choices in the early game, and that's also reflected with the Valdor. The Valdor is now Tech 4, whereas previously it was Tech 7 and the Tavara was Tech 8. So it's a very sizable shift in terms of its placement in the tech tree, which I quite like. The thing to highlight with the Valdor is, unlike the Tavara, it is quite a bit weaker. It has less hull, it has less shields, and it doesn't have the additional weapon bank that the Tavara has. However, it does still come with the full barrage ability, which has now been reworked so that it no longer has the shield mitigation reduction. Because what we realized is, because similar with the Vorcha for the Klingons, the shield mitigation reduction on that ability when it was active essentially meant that the ship was basically dying as soon as you proc that ability. Yeah. You're getting a very brief period of bonus damage, but then because of the way Sin's concentrate fire tends to operate, you take so much damage in exchange that you just pop. And so the longevity of the ship was wasted. Now it's the case that there is a turn rate reduction and a shield restore rate reduction, rather than the shield mitigation reduction. So the ship, when using that ability, still suffers the movement penalties, but no longer suffers from the I'm going to immediately go ahead and kill myself now because I'm trying to use this ability. Another rework is the new Quantum Ballista. So this is an, dare I say, ultra range ability of 40,000 that does, it's a direct damage ability of 1,000 applied to target and then 500 to anything hit in the pathway. So the purpose of this ability and its position in tier 4 makes it a very powerful snipe ability. You can, if you have a couple of Valdors, in the sort of mid-game and you're wanting to hunt down priority targets, you can use combat maneuver for the extra max speed, you can use the quantum ballista, you can use the cloak if you want, and you can basically go through and sort of snipe targets at long range and then get in close and finish it off with full barrage and sort of slip away before your opponents have a chance to react. It makes it a very powerful capital ship strike force that you can have access to quite early on, and makes it very distinct from the Tavara in the later game. And so potentially what you have with the Romulans is a very powerful tactical and or strategic capital strike force that your opponents will have to be very wary of. Absolutely.
And I love the Valdor. I wanted to make a lot of changes to the ship. I didn't feel it was used because, as Tom highlighted there, that the Tavara was just such a distinctive pick because of its placement. It was right after the Valdor. And I think really both Tom and Rob had a lot of input in how the Valdor could be used better. And I want to come to Rob again in the tactics a bit later about Valdor Bomb, as we like to call it, in particular with Denatra's ability, which we'll come on to, and how powerful it can be to have multiple Valdors with the Quantum Ballista. So it's a very good ship. I do want to highlight that this is actually an updated model as well.
Yeah.
Max has been a real darling and actually provided us with a new Valdor. So what you're seeing here is an updated Max model. And I have to say, I mean, I love the Romulan ships anyway, but if you look at the detail
beautiful
on this,
it is phenomenal.
I'm hoping that not only with a new model, but with improved abilities, and just the fact that it featured in Nemesis, which is actually one of my favourite of the more modern Star Trek films. Just that combat scene there was fantastic. Actually you'll want to build these guys, and I'm hoping that you love it and you will build it. And Rob will tell you why you should build it a little bit later on. But that is the Valdor, or the new Valdor, as it sits. And that kind of brings us, Rob, to its bigger sort of sibling.
Yeah, so like Tom already highlighted, before these kind of lost their shield, they got basically a shield mitigation debuff that made them die just terribly quickly. But now, I mean, the Tavara is like the ultimate firepower vomit machine of death. Like, this thing just pukes firepower. It's amazing. So it's still got full barrage, just like its little brother. It's also got its tactical assault mode, which is just more firepower, and then it's got glory to the Empire, or pride of the Empire. That's right, which is just even more firepower, more
energy weapon cooldown, some shield restore rate, some additional shield mitigation.
Just more vomit of death, and then it can cloak. This ship is like the definitive. I want to see a lot of phasers and torpedoes and just things flying at my opponent.
Yeah, this is. I think the new Tavara really does now have its place in the fleet. Before, I know a lot of players were just favouring the, because to be fair, the Directive is no slouch at the end of the thing, because it does have a lot more weapon banks. But what people don't often take into account is, while the Directive, you can see on the info card here that it has a lot of weapons firing, and the Tavara looks like it has relatively few. With all the weapon cooldowns stacked, the Tavara massively outstrips what the Directive.
Yeah, I think this might be one of the highest just sort of sustained damage output ships in the game.
Yeah. Sword of Kalis, eat your heart out.
He wants you to show the DPS before and after using the abilities in the chat.
So I think one of the issues we'll have is we are getting some artifacts. I've used the all research, guys. There will be a little bit of lies going on, inflation, but with full barrage, you can see the pulse disruption damage is 322. So there you go. And I think tactical assault mode adds as well. Let me just remember.
Yeah.
388. There you go. That is.
Look at those damage numbers.
There is a lot of damage.
Yeah.
You got to take it to. Oh my goodness.
I mean, they are, again, if you're looking at it, they are tough, but they're not that tough. Their hull is quite lacking.
Some flex tape.
Yeah, so but their shields are very, very strong. So I think in terms of like if you look at these two again in more stats, the Pterodactyls will out tank a Tavara in terms of if they're both being shot at by an opposing enemy, but the Tavara will absolutely bring some to that enemy in combat. And
I don't think those numbers are accurate either. I think it does more damage than it says it does, to be honest.
It's what you're not seeing in this, as always, is the amount of weapon banks it can fire on, and just the sheer amount of firepower. It's take our word for it, guys. And Tavara is a beast. But you have, because you're probably thinking, well, how do I play this wrong? You have 22 capital ship shots to play with, so there's room for all of these capital ships in there. And without further ado, that kind of brings us nicely onto our heroes. And we're going to start, Rob, because I know he's one of your favourites here in the Romulans.
Well, apparently you guys buffed him, so I'm not even fully in the loop anymore.
Shall I go? All right, okay. Tom, would you like to do Tomahawk?
I can. Tomahawk, obviously, one of our favourite Romulan, the Next Generation commanding officers, a nemesis of the venerable Captain Picard, hero of the Romulan Star Empire. He commands the Pterodactyls, a common theme with the Romulan heroes. Both him and Seela command the Pterodactyls, whereas Denatra gets her warbird, Valdor, of course. Very plainly, Tomahawk has 3 types of abilities, and 3 abilities. He has a self-damage reduction improvement ability that makes him more difficult to kill. Then he has a sort of strategic ability, which makes warp drive speed, so the speed at which ships travel between wells, slower for enemy ships that are attempting to leave and attempting to come into the system. So it will slow the rate at which enemy ships can reinforce, and it will slow the rate at which enemy ships can escape. So your opponent warps out and you're wanting to pursue, you trigger that ability, you chase with everything else, you will get there before they do. Pretty sweet. And then lastly, he has a quantum implosion ability, which disables abilities on all enemy ships, including dreadnoughts, for not super long, only sort of 10 seconds, and it increases by 2 per level. So I say 2, then at 3rd level it's 15. So I'd have to check what the final number is. Maybe 20. I'm not sure completely. But you're doing a little bit of damage over time, not too much, but you're also then again slowing max speed. So because Tomahawk is only a tier 2 hero, and you have plenty of capital ship slots, you don't really have any excuse not to get him out quite early on. And so when you're stacking him with a Vengeance, which also has max speed reduction, you have an early game tool for hunting down potentially strategic enemy targets, capital ships, for example, if you're able to take those early engagements.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very good starter hero. We say that all about starter heroes, but Tomahawk is legitimately a good starter hero. And I just want to mention before we go on to Seela, which is our other Pterodactyl hero, their Pterodactyls, because they are Pterodactyls, will start off with the base Pterodactyl model and will also update as you update your Pterodactyls. So this is something that's quite unique to the Romulan heroes in the fact that their ships also get better as you level up your Pterodactyl research. So they get more powerful variants of the Pterodactyls as you go. So these heroes become very interesting because your early game hero suddenly becomes... Not that all early game heroes aren't good in late game, but suddenly Tomahawk becomes better as the Seela as you go up that ranking in your Pterodactyl types. So very, very useful, very versatile when you get to end game as well. So fantastic starter hero. Use him. Rob... Let's go on to our other.
Okay, Seela's I think my favorite, to be honest. I love she's got an ability that passively causes damage mitigation debuff to enemies. Right there, Tetrion Field Emitter. that's amazingly powerful, and it makes your fleet do a ton more damage. And then she's got like the big brother ability of the Shadow, Psionic Subverter, which it just does what the Shadow does and makes everything spin, but even better. And then I can't even, you know what, I almost never used this other ability, Tal Shiar Network. I don't even know exactly what that one does.
I want to see a world far, far away. I can use the Tal Shiar Network. It's quite cool.
Basically, it's cool, but you want the shield mitigation debuff and the spinny ability. That's where it's at.
So basically, if you press that, all of the gravity wells around where Seal is located that are connected will be visible to you.
You should scout. You should just have scouts, though, anyways.
Well, I still think it's good.
Well, but you can always just use your culture stations to do the same thing, or just scout, or both.
You can. You know, there's a lot of ways for the Romulans to get data over the other players. They're sneaky like that.
Like, yeah, don't get me wrong. It's not bad. I'm not bashing on the ability. It's just
he hates
the other abilities. They're still good.
He loves everything else. He hates this one. I think it's very, very interesting. It actually used to be more powerful, and it was considered too powerful. It used to basically light up half the map, but we stopped that. So interesting. But that's Sealer, and Tom, I'm going to jump to you for our last hero, which is in the new sexy Valdor, Denatra.
Commander Denatra of the Warbird Valdor. Yes. Yeah. Denatra is. As is sort of the theme with the endgame heroes, there is a fleet buff ability with Denatra. So her ability is an increase to weapon cooldown and an increase to chance to hit. And so within a AoE range, she will decrease weapon cooldown of friendly ships and increase their chance to hit. So you're more consistently doing damage, and you're doing damage quicker. Your weapons are firing faster. In addition, she then has a tactical superiority. Both of these abilities are passive, keep in mind. So the fact that Denatra has antimatter in her ship loadout doesn't really matter because they're passive abilities. And that is a weapon cooldown, weapon range reduction, and chance to hit reduction to enemy ships. So enemy ships shoot slower, their weapon range is shorter, and their chance to hit is less. So you have a mix of self-buff and enemy debuff whilst Denatra is present. Then her more niche ability is Warbird Wing. So Denatra has the capacity to call in additional Valdors to her location. Hence why I say it's a bit of a niche ability, because normally you build them at your shipyards.
I don't think as niche.
Say you're raiding with Denatra, and you lose a Valdor that you have, and you need to replace it. Just like that, you have a replacement. I think this ability might need a small update, because the supply cost is apparently 30, and looking at it, the Valdor's supply cost is 40 now. So that likely needs updating, and possibly also the resource cost, to make sure that does line up with the shipyard cost. So you're not getting cheaper Valdors, you're getting the same cost Valdors. But what you get with leveling is, once you hit level 3 on the ability, when you call in Valdors, assuming you have the supply, you will be able to call in
maintain this course.
2 additional Valdors on top. I say 2. Looks like it might be spawning 3.
It does spawn 3.
3. It says it spawns 2, but apparently you get 3 for the price of 2.
You get 3 for the price of 2.
You can have a rather potent reinforcement force, all the better to hunt Praetor Shinzon with.
Absolutely, you need multiples of these, because we're getting to the beast. But yes, Denatra is very powerful. We're excited for this. Why I wanted to highlight before we go on to the beast, I was going to let Rob just talk about, well, Caesar kind of highlighted there, but we were going to talk, Rob, a little bit about the Valdor bomb and how you can use Denatra's reinforcement ability to really give you that quantum ballista edge.
Yeah, I think the thing with Romulans that you're going to find is a theme now is it's about capital ship superiority, and you're going to want to develop that throughout the game as much as possible, and it's going to happen at all stages of the game, because you're not just going to have superiority by being Romulans, just because you're not going to have like the same level of economy or the same ability to produce powerful cruisers as other factions. So you're going to be wanting to level up your capital ships as you're sort of destroying your opponents and keeping them from getting theirs leveled up. And there's not much that's better for that than like a mix of Valdors and then anything that can basically pin a capital ship, because that quantum ballista, you fire several of those at a high level at like if you level those up and max that ability out, we'll just see like how potent that is. You can snipe a capital ship like an opponent hero or useful capital ship like an enemy Shadow or an enemy Negvar or a Nebula, for example, or just straight up nuke Picard. Like this is 1400 damage and then 1800 damage anything it passes through. You fire 3 of those, and that's actually a sizable chunk of damage. Then you fly up and light up the full barrage and just take it the rest of the way down.
Yeah,
that's really good for gaining that capital ship superiority that the Romulans need to win the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, very, very powerful Valdor bomb. A tactic I hope we'll see more people use when they're fighting in multiplayer, specifically. And also, get to see that lovely new model from Max as well by just building many Valdors. So, the Valdor bomb, great tactic. Rob, I'm going to stick with you for this one because I know you love this ship as well.
I think we'll all end up talking about this. I think there's so many ways to build this ship compared to other factions, dreadnoughts. This is such a unique ship, really.
Yeah, the scimitar, the Titan Hunter, as Draconis, who was one of the former devs who helped me originally design the abilities for the scimitar, but she's a predator. That's what she is. So, Rob, tell us a little bit about the scimitar.
Well, the way I see it, there's probably 2 or 3 different ways you can really build this thing. You can build it as a direct damage monster, kind of focusing on the wave and pulse abilities, which basically target fleets and planets respectively. Usually the one that targets the fleets is the one you'd probably find yourself using to build around, and then you build into its damage and that ability, and then maybe a couple points into Pattern Shinzon Theta, which is a kind of an area debuff to enemies. That's one way to build it that will basically allow you to get a lot of damage in on a fleet quickly. But you can also do perfect cloak builds, and perfect cloak is essentially a cloak where the ship can still fire and it cannot be uncloaked by detection. And if you put enough points into your antimatter regeneration, which is one of the things you can upgrade on this Titan, if we look at that, you can get enough antimatter regeneration between that and the Romulan culture boost to antimatter regeneration and friendly culture, that if you're culture bombing your opponent and you're in friendly culture with this thing, you can almost keep perfect cloak up permanently, and you can just fly around and pick things off for free for ages. It's disgusting. This ship's so good.
It's a great ship.
You can just build it as kind of a fleet buff ship with a lot of tankiness. I mean, you can just build this ship in so many different ways, and that's very different to a lot of the other dreadnoughts, which there's really only maybe 1, possibly 2 ways you can build them. This ship, I think there's probably 4 different ways that you could build it. You could build it for pure damage output, build it for pure sneakiness. You could build it for pure tankiness, for like debuffing enemy fleet the most effectively. It's an amazing ship.
It's a great ship. We love it.
Just watching it shoot at things at the moment. Yeah, when you do the perfect cloak builds correctly, and you can sit there with your antimatter just regenerating as fast as it's degenerating, and this just never uncloaks, and it's just permanently cloaked, flying around, nuking things. It's the most glorious thing.
What's that? You don't want that enemy homeworld to have any population? Allow me to introduce them to some failure on radiation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's nice. Planet bomber. Boom.
So we will just see if I can get to a good
Warp signatures detected.
Alter course.
And what we
It's
want
a really
to do-
flexible ship. You can do so many things with it.
Change heading.
All wings, return to hangars. Combat landings authorized.
But you know what it doesn't have, though, guys? We have to point this out. It doesn't have shockwave torpedoes, so is it really that good?
Well, I like to think it's that good.
Fire torpedoes at will.
It is that good, but I love
so
shockwave
good.
torpedoes.
It's probably the best Titan. Well, this is a debate. We tested that before. I did a stream.
I think in a one-on-one scenario, it would
It's the
probably
best.
beat any Titan.
Yeah.
But that being said, all the Titans are really amazing. Trying to argue which Titan is best is
Yeah. Absolutely.
hard.
We'll just leave the scimitar there for the minute, and that brings us kind of nicely to our fleet's all
We
moving.
are
Look
the
at them.
superior race.
There's another scout. It's happened again.
It's happened again. Those pesky scouts. I tell you, those feds. Let's just get rid of him there.
And you don't put your fleet on hold position.
There's a
No.
stray Miranda too.
What's wrong with you?
The Miranda. Yeah. Oh, actually, that would be bad. Let's not have that Miranda right next to the ship we're going to demonstrate in a second. Because if that thing goes off,
Oh, yeah.
we're in
Yeah, the
problems.
progenitor. He's right. The progenitor would one-tap the the scimitar.
The progenitor is, I think, of all
An
dreadnoughts,
exception.
an exception to every rule in existence. Tom, do you want to tell us a little about this little beastie here? Very, 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 very tiny ship.
Dishonor.
Well, I mean, Worf does say that the Romulans are without honor. But given that I think the Klingons built the first one, I would say you could argue the Klingons are the ones actually without honor. The Wings of the Phoenix, I believe it's an Armada 2 vessel,
It was.
and that's why you was so adamant about putting it in. It is a shockwave ship of a Romulan equivalence. Very simply. Like the shockwave ship, you send it somewhere, you press a button, and it forms, unlike a Klingon shockwave ship, where it just makes a very big explosion, the Romulan vessel forms an artificial black hole. In practice, it's just a particle effect, let's be honest, guys. But it still does an extreme amount of damage in
Fire it on the fleet. Fire it on our fleet.
in exactly the same way the shockwave ship does an extreme amount of damage. It's a very cool particle, though. I'll say that. It has some different abilities to the Klingon variant. It's got more abilities that are tied with the Shadow, so you can spawn holographic fleet. You can spawn the Singularity Projector and the Psionic Blast. And as a result, you can potentially sort of use the holographic fleet to distract fire enough to get the Romulan shockwave ship. Calling it Wings of the Phoenix just seems silly. Romulan black hole ship into the heart of your enemy fleet and wave goodbye to it. Unless, of course, it's a progenitor, then that might survive. Depends how close you can hug it.
Spinny, spinny.
Gosh, these ships are such a meme. All right. Let's watch this beautiful doom effect.
How did he survive? He always does this. Damn you, Cisco. Barely survives, but he managed to survive it.
Yeah, I do have to say, it is a beautiful effect. I mean, these ships are memes, and if you use them, you're a bad person, but they are beautiful. That Defiant lived.
That's not any Defiant, that's Cisco himself, isn't it? Oh no, it's a Defiant. It is a Defiant. I thought it was Cisco. Cisco died. But it looks like we've got the Feds have taken over the galaxy and are closing on my territory. So yeah, that's kind of sad for me.
It is more brave to live than to die.
Let's go deal with the Feds quickly with the rest of the fleet. So that kind of concludes our ships. We've got a few little bits that we want to talk about. But I thought just so we can liven up the stream, we'll just send our fleet over for funsies to go deal with some Feds.
Take us to warp, Sub-Commander.
Because that's a sizable Fed fleet, actually.
Engage engines.
Swiftly and silently.
And we'll see how the Feds react. They might just jump to my... Well, they might engage. Or they might run away. They might be a little bit scared of us. I'd be scared of us, Feddies. Yeah, they're running away now. So, sadly, won't get to show you too much. Oh, wait a second. The Valdors are already engaging, it looks like. It's like one Intrepid class just getting bombarded from a distance. So yeah, we'll leave them there for the second and wait for the see if the Feds will finally engage us. And I think it's time to have a little bit of chat about the turrets, Tom, and how because obviously you've done a lot of redesign works. We'll pause that for a second on the turret system itself.
Yeah. So the just dive straight in.
Yeah.
The Romulan turrets follow pretty much the same sort of vein as the Federation ones. So the Disruptor turret and Torpedo turrets are both one tactical slot each. They are statistically weaker than the Klingon, Cardassian, Borg sort of universal turrets. But they do individually have quite high damage outputs for their respective damage type. So the Torpedo turret, I believe, is anti-very heavy, and the Disruptor turret, I believe, is anti-light. I will quickly just go into the game files and confirm that with you all. Plasma turret. So the missile, anti-very heavy, and then the Disruptor turret, anti-medium. The Disruptor turret, although it's anti-medium, it does have the capacity to fire at strike craft. Same with the Federation turret. So although it's not going to do a huge amount of damage to them, broadly speaking, because of the way strike craft health is and the amount of damage done per shot, in all probabilities, the anti-medium will still be sufficient to destroy strike craft, even though their damage type isn't necessarily against strike craft. So the Disruptor turret fulfills the role of the more light end of the spectrum, and then the Disruptor turret, so the Beam Disruptor turret, is the smaller end of the spectrum, the frigates, the early cruisers. The Torpedo turret is your heavy hitter against things like capital ships, late game cruisers, that sort of jazz. Their abilities: the Disruptor turret has a target life support, which disables passive regeneration. Honestly, I think we might change that one slightly, because at the moment all it does is disable passive regeneration, which is a little bit, for 10 seconds, is a bit meh. And if you're in the heart of combat anyway, the passive regeneration isn't going to be huge because you get a reduction when you're in combat. And then there's a Nadion beam infusion, which does a very small amount of damage and reduces armor for 10 seconds. So I think possibly we'll look at revising the abilities. A supercharged torpedo, 500 damage and 73 damage per second for 8 seconds. 90-second cooldown, no. So I think possibly what we'll do with that one is look to change the damage taken and the duration a little bit and possibly reduce the cooldown, so you're getting a little bit more damage utility from that. And then there's a consuming fire upgrade that applies damage per second for 15 seconds when a torpedo hits. So again, we might in the same vein as the frigate and cruiser heavy plasma burn, I think we'll probably look to revise the figures on that so it's a little bit more up to spec with the frigates and cruisers. The graviton flux generator, as Rob has mentioned in chat, is an excellent ability. Within a range of 12,000 meters, all enemy abilities are disabled. That is huge.
Yeah, that is.
It cannot be overstated how strong that is for the Romulans.
Well, that one's just passive as well. Like,
And
if
it's
you don't
passive,
try in
yep.
and get rid of that, you're done. Even
Yep.
if you're Borg, you're just fucked because you didn't.
You don't have any abilities. It's not pleasant. And then you have a graviton snare, which is a targeted ability which disables impulse engines and maneuvering thrusters for 30 seconds, so the target becomes static for 30 seconds. Keep in mind, though, they do use 6 tactical slots. And even on your home world now, you only have 25 tactical slots. So use them sparingly, because if you do overinvest in them, you're not going to have much space for anything else. Your Warbird Titan dock is still a tactical structure of 12 tactical slots. Repair docks are still 6 tactical slots. And the Romulans, like the Klingons, can build minefields themselves that will cloak once activated and deal direct damage to target when a target flies in range.
Quite a lot of damage as well.
Quite a bit, yeah. I think 2,500 target and 1,200 in an area around the target, so it's a cheeky amount of damage for sure.
And they're homing mines, which is the difference between these and the Klingon ones. These will actually magnetically attach themselves to ships and explode. So if you fly an enemy ship through this, they'll all cluster. So they can even really, really cripple a capital ship. So they're pretty good mines.
If you're not careful, yeah.
If you're not careful. And then we come on to the Presidium, Tom. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this beastie-looking battle station of awesomeness?
Yeah, so as I did mention in the chat a little while ago, something we did notice recently going back through the star bases is that in the last release version of Armada 3, the starbase armor types were still set to Titan armor. And this is because in the pre-release before that, the Final Frontier, our long-range artillery ships, so New Orleans, Stalkers, what is now the White Wind, Darheels, were effective against Titan armor. And as such, they were effective against Titans. That is fine up until the damage constants were adjusted so that module damage type no longer did bonus damage to Titan armor type. So what you ended up with was a situation whereby the anti-starbase ships didn't actually do all that much damage to starbases because they were using the wrong not because they were using the wrong damage type, but because the starbases were using a damage type that module damage type was not good against.
Yeah.
So siege ships would still be relatively effective only because of the fact they outranged targets. They couldn't be shot back by the starbase, but that's why they took so long. So you should find in this release, if you attack a starbase, not outpost, a starbase with an artillery siege ship, it should take more damage and die quicker. Because it's now using the right armor. It's now using the right damage type to attack the right armor type.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that this is a lot stronger versus most ships in general now. So the siege ships are going to be much more important, but they will absolutely cut through star bases, and star bases are a massive investment. So
yeah. So star bases and outposts have had their damage types on their weapons adjusted slightly, whereas before they basically just used composite, which made them universally good against everything. Star bases now have a range of damage types on their weapons. I say optimistically. looking for the Starbase Romulan game file, so I can confirm that to myself that that is something I did. No, it isn't. Oh no. Okay.
They've not all been updated yet.
They've not all been updated yet. It is a work in progress.
It's
I'm
on
going to
the
check
list
the
of things to do.
I'm going to check the Federation one quickly now. Where are we? Starbase upgrade. Starbase, not Unity 1. Space dock. Still composite there as well. Okay. They will have a range of damage types.
Thank you.
That will make them individually effective at different types of targets.
Yes.
So a little bit like how in stock you have a close range damage type and a long range damage type. Starbases will have a similar sort of theme. So the pulse disruptors will be relatively good against your medium vessels. Beam disruptors will be quite good against your corvettes and frigates, and then the torpedoes will be quite good against your larger cruisers and capital ships. That will be where the range of damage type comes in. So, talking specifically about the Presidium, it has 3 upgrades of weapons, it has 3 upgrades of hull, to a total of, with max hull and shield and armor research, not including artifacts, 94,500 hull, 98,000 shields, and 18 armor. So, like most starbases, chonk.
Very tanky.
14 strikecraft on the strikecraft upgrades. Merchant facilities, which, as is the theme with the Romulans, don't generate too much in trade income, I'm afraid. But what they do have is an Imperial Enforcement upgrade, which increases allegiance on the planet by 5%. Honestly, that's something I think we could probably buff slightly to have a couple of additional levels, maybe bring the allegiance up to maybe 15%. To sort
I
of
don't
play...
know, 15's pretty big. I wouldn't go higher than 10. 10's pretty... Well, I guess
It's
Starbases
5,
are pretty
but
rare now. Yeah.
Starbases are very expensive to have, so...
There you are. Outposts are better.
You then have a settlement program to have additional population, which generates its own tax income. Weapon upgrades, you have the Collapsar Burst, which generates a singularity around the station, which reduces weapon range, chance to hit, and max speed of enemy ships around the station. Hidden weaponry, which supposedly comes from Borg, which adds a Starbase variant of the quantum absorption ability that the Directive has, which restores shields and adds shield mitigation, as well as provides a variant of the holographic fleet, which generates
this Starbase has
6
to be the tankiest one.
6 Griffins to 6 Griffins to divert fire from it towards. And then, as an added bonus, the Romulan Starbase has access to the transwarp pathway ability. So, whereas the Borg have the capacity to build transwarp nodes, the Romulans, through their Starbase, have the capacity to create transwarp nodes on their planets between 2 Starbases with that upgrade. So you can have like a mini temporary transwarp network to utilize rapid jump between different points in your empire.
You can. It's very
and that,
cool.
in a very quick summary, is
the Presidium.
The Presidium.
Battle station.
And I know I definitely changed the armor types on the Starbases and outposts.
Yeah, you did. But we got a little bit of work. So I think that kind of highlights, guys, where we are. We're kind of just doing those finishing touches to things like the Starbases, minor factions. And as when we get to the end of our last factional stream, which will be the Cardassians and Dominion, which I know Rob's looking forward to, and I'm sure some of you guys are as well. I don't know how to use it now. It never worked for me. So you need 2 of them, Dominus. And what you need to do, so what I do often say to players is, you can tag anything like in any strategy game with your control 1, control 2, etc. So if you have 2 Presidiums, if you set 1 to control 1 and 1 to control 2, what you want to do is flick between them and activate the transport pathway at the same time. And that then creates a world. So if we had one here, for example, and we had one all the way over, let's say over here at this planet, you'd have a direct path to jump from here to here. So your ships would fly along an invisible line here between the two worlds without needing another phase lane. So it creates this phase lane, this warp lane, if you like, between the two planets when they're both active. So,
yeah, it's amazing.
It is temporary, and it does take a few seconds for it to actually take effect on the planet. So if you click it and then immediately try and jump, it might not work because the buff might not be applied to the planet. So you just need to wait for when on the planet info card it says transwarp node. That will tell you that the line is active, and assuming that transwarp node is active on both ends, you can then jump between the two.
But the other advice I give you is to have your fleet ready at the edge of the gravity well, because it only lasts for 120 seconds.
For where you want to go.
Where you want to go. And in Sins, it's not something we can help, but ships do take a while to align to warp if they're in a big fleet. So it's just something to bear in mind. So you may want to not have them warp as a fleet. That's, again, entirely up to you how you want to do it. You don't want to have them warp individually, but that's the way you use it. It's a very powerful ability. It takes some getting used to, but very, very powerful ability.
Yeah.
A couple of things I'd just like to highlight, as always, as we do with every stream, because people tend to overlook them. Caesar already mentioned the Imperial Trade Forum as the ability to switch between extraction, so it can become either a resource node or a trade station, depending on what you want to do. So that's quite good now that the logistics slots have been changed. And the second one I want to highlight is, as always, the comm station, because we tried to, in STA3, make all our buildings kind of interesting. And again, this is something else I suggest to Romulan players to set their control buttons to, or number buttons to. You can tag multiple comm stations, and you have an ability there called Imperial Spy Network. And what this allows you to do is to select a gravity well in the distance, and effectively then see what's actually happening there for a duration of time. So I can actually now see this Federation world, see what's inside it, even though it's all the way on the other side of the map. So it's a very powerful ability, the Tau Shiar network. And often I know that we advise players, if you have multiples of these, you can actually map out an entire attack path to see what's waiting for you, or to try and find a fleet if you need to see where an enemy fleet has gone. It's quite a powerful ability. So, and kind of Rob alluded to this earlier, the Romulans have numerous ways to see what's around them, or on the other side of the galaxy, or, you know, putting operatives on ships, which, as we said earlier, we're going to buff a little bit on the Vengeance. So there's lots of ways to get information, and you know, the good old adage is that the better intelligence you have, the more easier a victory will become. So, you know, it's a very powerful tool for multiplayer games. Again, even if you're playing against the AI, very, very good to see where the AI are, what they're doing, or if you're playing against another player, to see what the enemy player is up to, where they're amassing their fleet. I do tend to find a lot of players do like to amass giant fleets, and knowing where their fleet is coming from is half the battle sometimes, so you can prep your defences, etc., and make sure your fleet is not too far away from home if you're about to be attacked. So the Romulans have an edge in that, and I kind of want to, also we'll show a few more battles off in a second with the Romulan fleet here. I'll add some ships into this gravity well. But Rob, do you want to, while the battle rages and I get this set up, do you want to just tell us about what, if a player is going to fight another player with the Romulans, can you tell us firstly, what's the general advice you'd give in player versus player in the multiplayer community? And two, the second question I have for you is, how would you play Romulans yourself against each faction?
Okay. Well, I think there's a couple things that are the primary things you need to know. There's a lot of advanced stuff you can do with Romulans, but I think the most important thing is make sure you always social specialize your capital on Romulans. Other factions, they can do industry spec builds on their capitals for early aggression and stuff. On Romulans, you really, really want to do that social spec because you get so many allegiance and tax increases. That'll give you enough money early on to start going out and doing stuff. Then on your first planet you take, I would probably get a couple yards. It's probably going to be a little asteroid, so you can throw 2 yards down on it. And then you can tech up into the Dominus, go out, contest neutral asteroids with that sort of powerful I guess, mid-game ship. It's got a lot of edges over the other players.
How may I
And
serve?
what you'll do then is you'll have enough economy to start building capital ships, and then the primary thing with Romulans is level your capital ships up, stop your opponent from leveling their capital ships up. If you do that, you're going to wind up with capital ships that are level 5 or 6. Your opponents might be 2 or 3, and when you finally do fight, you can kind of micro a couple of abilities, and simply because you have the better capital ships, you will have the edge, and you'll be able to win.
Brilliant, brilliant. And is there any particular factions that the Romulans struggle against?
You know, it's hard to say with the Romulans, because the Borg are kind of the same way, where they want to level their capital ships up and kill their opponents, but their capital ships are so much more powerful. I would say Romulan versus Borg would be a pretty painful matchup in a lot of ways. But like I know that for a fact against Federation and Klingon, the Romulans actually have a decent matchup thanks to the Dominus and the Griffin. They work really, really well together to kind of shut down a lot of those early sort of Miranda. Oh gosh, what's the other one? For some reason, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Their starter frigate, the
Saber.
The what?
Federation Saber, you mean?
Yeah, the Saber, thank you. I couldn't remember the name for the life of me. A lot of early game compositions are going to be sort of Corvette and frigate, just because you got the anti-medium, you have the anti-light, you can kind of go in for an early attack with that, and the Griffin's heavy armor completely shuts that down, so it makes it really hard to kill the Romulans in the early game now, which was their biggest weakness before this patch, I would say, is that they just died in the early game, and that was that. They couldn't get enough money. Now their economy still is slower and weaker, but they have some tools that you can use rather cheekily to sort of outlast and then build your economy. And their economy in the late game now is actually probably one of the strongest.
You want to see? I need to tone that spinning down a little bit, I think, or if it's just this, because that's a little bit crazy. So
don't do it. It's beautiful.
There's a spinning Excalibur if you ever wanted to see one, guys, from the silent abilities. I think that's the combination of sealers as well flying. That's interesting. But yeah, we have a good battle. I think you can see. I will tone that down a little bit because I think that needs. That's just crazy. I'm trying to find the Tavara here. There we go. You can just see the amount of kind of firepower the Tavara just pushes out here. So much firepower.
What is the request?
So I suppose, guys, we're coming to the end of the stream. Is there any questions you have for us? I'm sure the feds do throw up after all that spinning. Is there any kind of questions you have about the Romulans that you want Rob to answer, maybe, or you have for Tom? Just put them in the chat quickly, guys, while we play out this battle, and we'll see if we can answer any questions you have before we call it an end to the stream. It's the amount of green phosphorus bolts that are just exploding on these.
Yeah,
these ships.
I love the Romulans. I love their fleet. I love watching all the torpedoes flying around, and especially when you have like 10 Tavaras, just because you're memeing, and it literally is like a green wave.
The Praetor will be pleased. The Praetor will be pleased.
Yo, call in some Tavaras and fire some quantum ballistas at that baby.
Where's the Valdor? You mean the Valdors?
Yeah, sorry,
What is
Valdors.
the request?
Where's the Archer? Is an Archer alive still? I'm sure she is. That's a Titan.
Do you mean like the beams? I think all the beams have been replaced, yes, but we haven't done like a major overhaul of the general animations for the Romulans outside of that.
Some particles have been updated. Farbicus would be able to sort of highlight what one specifically. Broadly speaking, there's been a review of most particles across the board to try and make sure some of the more bright and large scale ones that are particularly oppressive and a bit of an eyesore are toned down.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got moving phasers, moving disruptors in this instance, that Max has done.
Could you get goal for the Cardi stream? I will definitely ask him. It's a lot harder to get hold of Gold these days. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the greatest internet where he's now living, which is one of the reasons you haven't seen him more. But I'm sure if we can get him, we'll try. If not, we will do our very best to do. You'll hear his voice anyway because his voice is all over the game. But we will try and get him there if we can to show things off. Yeah, absolutely.
I just trash talked Chris, guys. I'm a bad person. He's bad, but we love him.
So yeah, so there's been a lot, as we said, there's a lot of particle effects there. We've got some, you can still see there's some tweaks there. I do want to touch that little spinny motion a little bit. I think that's a bit extreme. So a bit oppressive, so we'll look at that. But generally, I think the Romulans, I mean, final thoughts. I'll ask you guys, Tom, what are your final thoughts on the Romulans now and how they play? What any final thoughts you can share with the community?
They've got more options, certainly. The movement of their capital ship research gives you different opening options with how you want to spec your capital ship build up. Their frigates and cruisers were sort of always their weak point, but now that you've got some very distinct ship types, depending on what it is you're facing, you do have the capacity to quite handily deal with what you need to deal with. I don't think the Romulans were ever in a particularly bad spot. Something to keep in mind is that because capital ships, their level scale base stats, so things like armor points per level, hull and shield points per level, shield mitigation per level, has been removed. A lot more emphasis has gone back to the abilities rather than the raw levels. So, broadly speaking, the movement of some of the capital ships earlier in the tech tree just means you have the capacity now to start establishing and mix and matching certain ability builds more easily than you could previously.
Absolutely.
I wanna highlight that the Romulans have probably more options and sort of nuances than any other faction, and that is both good and bad, because if you've mastered it all and you're very aware of what's going on, you're really on top of everything, really on top of all your capital ships, you're not losing them, you're on top of your scouting, you're not getting caught off guard by anything, you're going to have the most flexible response to almost anything. But there are very simple things that other factions can do that will just overpower you if you're not on top of those things, because they don't have to deal with as many complex interactions, and they can just build brute force and come and kill you. So this faction, more than ever, and it's always kind of been this way, that if you're very skilled, the Romulans are a great faction. Like if you're going around microing things and you can kind of be on top of a ton of things at once, they're really powerful. But if you're not that player, this faction might be hard for you in a competitive sense. I mean, you'll be able to play just fine against the AI, but if you're playing in the competitive multiplayer scene, you're going to have to be pretty on top of things to make the Romulans work the best they can work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gives you a nice little chance just to, as I always like to do on the chat, just to shout out that Rob, who's been giving you guys some tactics on player versus player, does run the official Armada free multiplayer Discord. He set that up a few years back now.
Years ago now.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
And it's probably one of the few actual dedicated Sins mod Discords for multiplayer, for particularly for Armada 3. So we feel very, very blessed to obviously have something just dedicated to Armada 3 for multiplayer games. So if you are looking for games, there's a good group of guys there as well to play with. And also, don't forget, if you're not a member, to also join the Stellar Parallax Discord, where we'll be posting more updates on Armada 3, AOTF 1 and AOTF 2, our system mods, for Armada 3, which again are receiving quite a lot of work, new models, better models even than Armada 3 currently has. If you thought it couldn't get better in Sins, oh, it definitely can. And also to also keep an eye on Stellaris, because we released last year our Federation ship pack for Stellaris, and we are working away on our other packs for that game as well. So if you are a fan of Stellaris, do keep an eye on the Stellar Parallax Discord, because they will have some good news coming for you very, very soon on that one as well. And that kind of just leads me, guys, to thank once again Tom, or Caesar's Legion as his gamer tag is, and Rob, or Robert Saunders, for their input into the mod and all their help with crafting what is the final version of Armada 3. So thank you, guys. And,
thank you for having us.
Hell, thank you. You've done most of the work.
Oh, well, I try. But I want to thank you guys as well for tuning in to watch as well. And sorry for the mess ups at the start of the stream. I will get this right. Maybe by the last stream, I will actually have a perfect stream. We will see. But
that's going to be the worst one now that you said that. It's going to be a catastrophe.
I know.
It won't even work.
It should come pretty quickly. I will talk to both Tom and Rob about when we can get the Cardassian Dominion stream ready to go. It should be. It will be this month. Yes, the game is not far off for getting into your hands. I will note that Rob is on the lookout for a few more beta testers for multiplayers. So if you are interested in testing the new version of STA 3, then do chat to Rob, because he can assist you in joining the testing team as well for multiplayer. So something to worth looking at. But I think that is it for now, guys. Once again, thanks for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and we will see you very, very soon.